Margot slapped Clara's photograph down on the table and laughed. "Send her. Let the rancher open that envelope and see what Missouri's leftover looks like." Eliza covered her mouth. Their mother said nothing. Clara stood in the doorway and heard every word. She didn't cry. She didn't defend herself. She walked to her room, sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, and made the only decision that had ever been entirely hers. She was going to Wyoming, not to prove them wrong, not to beg anyone to see her differently. She was going because she was done being someone else's punchline. If this story stays with you, subscribe to our channel and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far Clara's story travels. The Whitfield house had rules nobody ever said out loud. There were the daughters who mattered, Margot and Eliza, and then there was Clara. Clara wasn't cruel. Clara wasn't lazy. Clara wasn't dim or difficult, or any of the things people usually gave as reasons for not loving someone. Clara was simply ordinary looking in a family that worshipped beauty the way other families worshipped God. And in a small Missouri farming town in the summer of 1885, that was practically a sin. Margot had golden hair and a laugh that turned heads at every social gathering. Eliza had a figure that caused men to forget their own names. Their mother, Ruth Whitfield, paraded those two girls through town like prized livestock at a county fair, head-high chest, out smile-sharp as a butcher's knife. Clara walked behind them, always behind. She was 26 years old, and she had spent those 26 years learning exactly where she stood in the world, which was somewhere between the front door and invisible. She wasn't ugly, not truly. But she was plain, and in that world plain was close enough. Her features were soft where her sisters were striking. Her figure was fuller where theirs was slim. Her voice was quiet where theirs rang out like church bells designed to be admired. And she had long ago stopped pretending that any of it didn't hurt. The morning it all began, Clara was in the kitchen before sunrise. That was where she spent most of her mornings cooking breakfast, while her mother and sisters slept until the light was bright enough to be flattering. She had already made biscuits, already started the bacon, already hauled 2 buckets of water from the well, and brought in enough firewood to last the day. By the time Margot came downstairs in her best blue dress at nearly 9 o'clock, Clara had been awake for 4 hours. Margot didn't say good morning. She never did. She poured herself coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the folded newspaper she'd been carrying under her arm. Clara kept her back turned, stirring a pot of grits. "There's an advertisement," Margot said. Her voice had that particular tone, the one that meant she had already decided something and was only speaking out loud to enjoy the sound of her own cleverness. "A rancher. Out in Wyoming territory." She paused, letting it land. "He's looking for a wife." Clara didn't respond. She'd learned years ago that the safest reaction to Margot's announcements was no reaction at all. He wants someone honest, someone strong. Margot let out a small laugh that wasn't quite a laugh, more like air escaping through teeth. "Someone with good character." She said those last 2 words the way someone might say good luck to a man walking toward a cliff. Nathaniel Carter, 38 years old, widower, owns something like 4,000 acres up near Laramie. Cattle, horses, the whole enterprise. Eliza appeared in the doorway, still pinning her hair. "What are you reading?" Margot held up the paper. "A lonely rich man looking for a wife." Eliza crossed the room and read over her shoulder. A slow smile spread across her face. Neither of them looked at Clara. But Clara was listening. She was always listening. That was the thing about being invisible. People talked freely around you. "He sounds desperate," Eliza said. "He sounds perfect," Margot replied. Then she looked up finally deliberately and met Clara's eyes across the kitchen. And she smiled. That smile was the kind Clara knew the way she knew her own heartbeat. It meant something was coming. Something designed to remind her of her place. "We should send him Clara," Margot said. The words dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Eliza blinked for half a second. Then her smile caught up with her sister's. "Oh, that's terrible. she breathed, which meant she thought it was wonderful. He asks for a photograph. Wants to know what he's agreeing to. Margot tilted her head. Imagine his face when he opens the envelope. Clara set down her stirring spoon. She turned around. She looked at her sister, really looked at her, and said nothing. Because there was nothing she could say that would matter in that house. We'd be doing him a favor, Eliza added, laughing now. Better to know what he's avoiding early. Their mother appeared at the bottom of the staircase, drawn by the laughter. What is it? Ruth asked. Margot explained. The advertisement. The rancher. The plan. Ruth Whitfield listened, tipped her head, considered. Then she looked at Clara, the way she always looked at Clara, with that particular mix of pity and mild embarrassment that mothers reserve for the children they've quietly given up on. Well, Ruth said finally, it's not as if anyone else has come asking. And that was that. Chaba. They didn't ask Clara's permission. They didn't need to in their minds. Clara was an object in the story they were writing, not a person with a role in it. Margot wrote the letter. Eliza helped select the photograph, the most unflattering one they owned, taken at a cousin's wedding when Clara had been caught mid-turn and slightly squinting against afternoon sun. They described her accurately, but with strategic cruelty, emphasizing her plainness, her quiet nature, her unremarkable appearance. And they sent it. They were giddy for 3 days, checking the post with barely suppressed laughter, waiting for the letter that would confirm what they already knew. No man with options would ever choose Clara. What they expected was silence, or rejection, or better yet, some cold, polite note that would give them something to quote at the supper table for years. What they received 2 weeks later was an acceptance. Nathaniel Carter had written back. He said he appreciated her honesty in the photograph. Said most women sent their best image, and he'd spent enough of his life dealing with people who showed him their best face in order to hide their real one. He said a woman willing to be seen plainly was a woman worth knowing. He offered her passage west. He offered her a home. He offered her a salary, an actual written arrangement, because he was the kind of man who believed contracts were more honest than promises. And at the bottom of the letter, in handwriting that was careful and direct, he wrote, "If you are willing to make the journey, I will be at the Laramie station on the 14th of August. I will carry a blue handkerchief so you know who I am. I don't expect perfection. I expect someone real." Margot read the letter out loud. Her voice faltered somewhere around someone real. Then she set it down on the kitchen table and looked at it like it had personally insulted her. "He's either blind or stupid," she said. "Probably both," Eliza agreed, but her voice had lost its confidence. Clara reached across the table and picked up the letter. She read it herself, slowly, carefully, the way she read everything. Then she folded it and held it against her chest for exactly 3 seconds. And then she made the decision that would change the entire course of her life. "I'm going," she said. The silence that followed was enormous. Her mother stared. "Clara." "I'm going to Wyoming," Clara said. Her voice was quiet. But it had a quality her family had never heard in it before, a kind of stillness that wasn't weakness. The kind of stillness that means someone has stopped asking for permission. "Don't be ridiculous," Margot said, and she laughed, but the laugh had a nervous edge to it now. "It was a joke. He doesn't actually want you. He wrote back because he felt sorry for—" "He wrote back because he said yes," Clara interrupted. That was all she said. Margot opened her mouth, closed it. "You can't go live with a stranger in Wyoming," Eliza said. "You were happy to send me to one." Another silence, different texture. Ruth Whitfield sat down heavily in the kitchen chair. "Clara, be sensible. This man hasn't seen you in person. He doesn't know what he's agreeing to. When I arrive, Clara said, he can decide what he thinks." She looked at her mother. She looked at her sisters. She had spent 26 years in this kitchen, making their biscuits, hauling their water, listening to their assessments of her worth. She was so tired. Not the tired that sleep fixes, the other kind. "If he sends me home," Clara said, "I will come home, and I will be exactly where I am right now. which means I have nothing to lose." She paused. "But if he doesn't?" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. She had 3 days to pack. She owned less than her sisters assumed. 2 dresses, 1 good shawl, a small Bible her grandmother had left her, a tin box with $8.40 she had saved from years of small household tasks, pennies her mother sometimes let her keep, small coins from neighbors who'd paid her for mending and sewing. $8.40. That was her fortune. She packed it all into a single carpet bag, stitched a loose seam on her traveling dress, and spent her last evening in Missouri sitting at the kitchen table with a candle writing a letter. Not to Nathaniel Carter, to herself. It was a habit she had developed years ago when the loneliness got loud enough that she needed somewhere to put it. She wrote to herself the way some people prayed honest private without performance. That night, she wrote, "I do not know what I am going toward. I only know what I am leaving, and leaving a place that has always made you feel like a mistake is not a loss. It is the beginning of finding out if you were ever wrong about yourself." She folded the letter, tucked it into the tin box beside her $8.40. Then she blew out the candle and went to sleep. The train ride west took 5 days. Clara had never traveled farther than 20 miles from her birthplace. The world outside the window was enormous in a way that felt like both a threat and a relief, so vast it seemed impossible that anything as small as her family's opinion could follow her there. She watched the landscape change from the green familiarity of Missouri to the wide-open blonde grasslands of the territory, and something in her chest she hadn't realized was clenched began slowly, cautiously to loosen. She was afraid. She was also something else. Something she had no clean word for, except that it felt like air moving through a window that had been stuck shut for years. She ate almost nothing on the train, partly because she was frugal with her money, partly because her stomach was a knot that food couldn't get past. She rehearsed conversations in her head. "When he sees me, he will be polite, but distant. He will find some graceful way to return me to Missouri. He is a businessman. He will frame the rejection as a business decision." She rehearsed it so many times she almost believed it, almost made peace with it. But she got off the train in Laramie anyway. The station was crowded with men in work clothes and dust women managing children and luggage horses, tethered at the rail voices, mixing with wagon wheels and the sharp smell of coal smoke. Clara stood on the platform with her carpet bag and looked at the crowd. She was looking for a blue handkerchief. She almost didn't see him, because she was expecting someone who looked like money-pressed suit, silver watch chain, the particular arrogance of a man who'd been told all his life that he was important. But the man holding the blue handkerchief was wearing a plain cotton shirt and dusty boots. He was tall, genuinely tall, the kind of tall that means a person has had to duck through doorways their whole life, dark hair going gray at the temples, a jaw that looked like it had been set that way on purpose, eyes that were doing what Clara's eyes always did, quietly taking inventory. He was watching the platform. He found her before she found him. She knew because his eyes stopped moving. She walked toward him because she had run out of other options. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he is genuinely trying to understand. "Miss Whitfield," he said. Not a question, a confirmation. "Mr. Carter," she said. He looked at her for a moment, not in the way she had dreaded the quick assessment that ended in disappointment, but in the way she might look at a problem she was genuinely interested in solving. "You came all this way," he said. "I did." "Alone." "Yes." He nodded once slowly. "That tells me more about you than any picture could." He picked up her carpet bag before she could reach for it. And without another word, he led her toward the wagon. Clara rode beside him for 40 minutes without either of them saying much. She had expected the silence to be uncomfortable. It wasn't. It was the kind of quiet that happens between two people who are both too honest to fill space with noise that doesn't mean anything. The ranch appeared gradually, first the fence line, then outbuildings, then the main house, larger than she'd imagined, built in wood that had aged to a soft gray-brown solid and functional, not beautiful exactly, but built to last. She could see 3 ranch hands near the barn. They glanced at the wagon and then more slowly at her. She felt their assessment like a change in temperature. She kept her eyes forward. Nathaniel brought the wagon to a stop near the house and climbed down, then offered her his hand. She took it. His grip was dry and firm. "Mrs. Malone will show you your room," he said. "Supper is at 6. We'll talk after." A woman appeared in the doorway of the house, stout 60s. Silver hair pinned so severely it looked structural. She looked Clara up and down once with the expression of someone who has been disappointed by new arrivals before and is simply waiting to confirm expectations. "I'm Ada Malone," the woman said. "I keep this house. And I'll tell you now what I told the last girl who tried to come out here. This is a working ranch, not a society parlor, and I don't have the patience for women who expect to be catered to." "I don't expect to be catered to," Clara said. Ada Malone blinked. She looked at Clara again, different this time, remeasuring something. "Come inside," she said. "I'll put on coffee." Her room was small and plainly furnished. A narrow bed, a washstand, a single hook on the wall for her shawl. She set her carpet bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed. She could hear the ranch around her, men's voices, the distant stamp of horses, the particular creak of a large working building settling. She had expected to feel like an intruder. Instead, for reasons she couldn't quite name, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, like she had arrived somewhere that didn't already have a verdict about her. She took out the letter she'd written to herself on her last night in Missouri, read it once, then folded it back into the tin box with her $8.40. "I only know what I am leaving." Supper was the first real test. Ada had cooked roast chicken, boiled greens, cornbread, and set the table in the main room that served as both dining room and sitting room. Nathaniel was already seated when Clara came downstairs. Across from him, in a chair slightly too big for him, sat a small boy of perhaps 7 or 8, with dark hair and his father's serious eyes and a chin-first expression that suggested he had opinions about most things. "This is my son," Nathaniel said. "Thomas." The boy looked at Clara. Clara looked back. "Are you the lady from Missouri?" the boy asked. "I am." "My father says you traveled on the train for 5 days by yourself." "I did." Thomas considered this with the gravity of a child who takes information seriously. "That's a long time to be alone," he said. "It is," Clara agreed. "But I've had practice." Something shifted in Nathaniel's expression just slightly, a flicker of something she couldn't read, but he didn't say anything. They ate supper in the reasonable quiet of 3 people who don't yet know each other well enough to argue about anything, which is its own particular kind of peace. Afterward, Thomas was sent to bed. Ada cleared the table and disappeared with the noise of someone who knows when to make herself scarce. Nathaniel poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of Clara without asking. He sat. He looked at her. "I want to be honest with you," he said. "Please," Clara said. "I've had this ranch for 11 years. I built most of it myself, and the rest I built with my wife Margaret before she died 4 years ago." His voice was flat, not cold, just the flatness of a man who has said painful words so many times they've worn smooth. "Thomas grew up in a house that was sad for too long. I kept working because that was all I knew how to do. But a ranch runs on people, and people need—" He paused, seemed to feel around for the right word. "Warmth," Clara said quietly. He looked at her. "Yes." "You're not looking for love," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a practical observation. "Not yet," he said. "Maybe not ever. I don't know." He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. "I'm looking for partnership, someone honest, someone who can help make this place feel less like it's holding its breath." He set the cup down. "I don't know what they told you about what I expected. I don't know what you expected coming out here." Clara was quiet for a moment. "I expected you to look at me and regret writing back," she said. He didn't flinch. He didn't protest. He just held the statement in the air between them and examined it. "I looked at you on that platform," he said, "and I thought she came alone. 5 days on a train, with one bag." He paused. "That's not the behavior of someone who thinks poorly of herself." He looked at her directly. "Why did you come the truth?" She met his eyes. "Because I'd spent my entire life in a house where I was the last choice," she said. "And I decided I would rather face an uncertain future than spend one more year being someone's smallest story." Nathaniel was quiet for a long time. Then he picked up his coffee cup. "That," he said, "I understand." She thought she wouldn't sleep. She lay in the narrow bed listening to the ranch settle into night, the breathing quiet of a place that had been working hard all day and waited for the fear to come back. It didn't come back. What came instead? Somewhere between the last sounds of the hands heading to the bunkhouse and the first gray edge of dawn was something much quieter and much stranger, something that felt impossibly like possibility. The second week was harder. Clara had come prepared to work. She had not come prepared for how completely she would have to learn everything from scratch. The ranch operated on a logic that was foreign to everything she knew. Timing mattered differently here. The whole rhythm of the day was organized around animals and weather and the specific demands of land that didn't bend to human schedules. She made mistakes. She oversalted the stew on Tuesday and sat with the knowledge that 6 ranch hands had eaten food that tasted like ocean water without one of them saying a word to her face about it. Though she heard them talking outside, after which was in some ways worse. She misjudged the amount of firewood needed, and Ada had to make 2 extra trips to the woodpile, and Ada said nothing either, just moved past her in the kitchen with the studied politeness of a woman cataloging someone's failures for later. She went to the wrong pasture looking for the water bucket that Thomas had said was by the east fence, not realizing that on a 4,000-acre ranch, east fence was a direction, not a location, and spent 45 minutes looking before a hand named Gus found her and pointed her the right way, without smiling. She went to bed Tuesday night feeling the particular shame of someone who has confidently declared themselves capable, and then spent a day proving otherwise. She didn't cry, but she came close. Wednesday was the day Thomas showed her where the creek was. He appeared at the kitchen door after breakfast, his expression carrying the 7-year-old's blend of mission and casual indifference, and announced, "I could show you around if you want. I know where everything is." Clara looked at Ada, who didn't look back, which she had come to understand meant no objection. "All right," Clara said. They walked for 2 hours. Thomas knew the ranch the way a person knows something they grew up moving through, not just the geography, but the whole particular personality of it. Which fence sections got soft in wet weather, which horses were difficult in the morning versus calm in the afternoon, where the best blackberry thicket was, which part of the creek ran shallow enough to cross without boots. He talked constantly. He had opinions about everything. Clara listened to every word. "My father doesn't talk much," Thomas informed her at one point. "I noticed. He used to more, before my mother died." A pause. "He works instead of talking now." "Some people do," Clara said carefully. "Do you?" She thought about it. "I used to listen instead of talking, but it amounted to the same thing." Thomas looked at her sideways with his father's eyes. "What do you mean?" "It means sometimes when you're not sure what you're allowed to say, you get very quiet, and quiet can become a habit." He was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "I don't like being quiet," he announced. "I can tell," Clara said. He laughed, sudden, bright, unguarded, and Clara felt something in her chest shift like a door opening inward. That evening she found a ledger on the kitchen shelf. She wasn't snooping. She'd been looking for a pen to mark the supply list Ada had given her, and the ledger was right there, open to a page of household accounts that had clearly been maintained by someone who was better at ranching than arithmetic. She spent 10 minutes looking at it before she realized the columns didn't reconcile that someone had been recording supply costs against income with a consistent error that was small per entry, but compounding over 6 months into a significant shortfall. She closed the ledger, opened it again, worked through the numbers twice to be sure. Then she sat very still and thought about whether to say anything. In her family's house, pointing out that a man had made a mistake would have been received as an attack. She had learned early to notice things and stay quiet about what she noticed. But she thought about what Nathaniel had said, "I'm looking for someone honest." She put the ledger under her arm and went to find him. He was in the barn checking a horse's back leg when she came in. He looked up. She held out the ledger. "Your household supply columns have a 6-month running error," she said. "I'm not certain it's the only place it's occurring, but the shortfall it's created is—" She had done the mental arithmetic 4 times. "Substantial." He straightened slowly. He took the ledger. He looked at the page she had marked with a piece of straw. His jaw tightened. Then he looked at her. "How did you find this?" "I was looking for a pen," she said. "I wasn't deliberately." "How long did it take you to see it?" She hesitated. 10 minutes. The jaw tightened again, but differently this time, not anger. Something she couldn't read. "My foreman handles accounts," he said. His voice was careful now, the voice of a man choosing each word. "I thought he might," Clara said. Another silence. Nathaniel looked down at the ledger, back at her. "How do you know numbers like this?" "I kept my family's accounts," she said. "For 11 years. Nobody else wanted to." He didn't say anything for a long moment. He closed the ledger. He handed it back to her. "Can you check the rest of the books?" he said. "Everything we have." "Yes," Clara said. "I'll have Will bring them to the kitchen table tonight." "All right." She turned to go. "Miss Whitfield." She stopped. "Clara." He corrected himself. A small correction, but a notable one. She turned back. "Thank you," he said. And Nathaniel Carter, a man who had spent 4 years building walls around everything he needed and everyone he'd learned not to depend on, looked at her with an expression that wasn't gratitude exactly, but was something adjacent to it. Something that looked like the beginning of surprise. She worked on the books until after midnight. Ada, to her considerable credit, left a pot of coffee on without comment and went to bed. By the time Clara had finished, she had found 3 separate accounting errors, one of which was almost certainly not innocent, a pattern of small withdrawals in the supply columns that, taken individually, meant nothing but laid out across 14 months, told a story that made her stomach turn. She sat with that knowledge for a long time. Then she stacked the ledgers neatly, wrote her findings on 3 sheets of paper in her careful handwriting, and went to bed. She lay in the dark thinking about what she'd found, about what it meant for Nathaniel, about whether whoever was doing it knew that she had just arrived on this ranch with 26 years of noticing things and staying quiet about them. Not this time, she thought. Not this time. She turned onto her side and looked at the dark ceiling of her small room on a ranch in Wyoming she had arrived at as a joke. And for the first time in 26 years, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She put the 3 sheets of paper on the kitchen table at breakfast. Nathaniel looked at them before he looked at his coffee. He read slowly. She watched him without appearing to watch him the way she had learned to observe things in a house where direct looking got you noticed, and noticed meant criticized. His face didn't change while he read. That was something she had already filed away about him. He received information without performing a reaction to it. He processed first, responded second. In her experience, that was rarer than it should have been. When he finished, he set the papers down. "You found this last night," he said. "Yes." "All 3. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "The third one, the supply withdrawals. How certain are you?" "Certain enough that I wrote it down," Clara said. "I don't write things down unless I'm certain." He looked at her, Then the full direct attention of a man who had just recalibrated something internally. "My foreman's name is Dale Rourke," he said. "He's been with me 7 years. "I know," Clara said. "His signature is on 8 of the 14 months. Nathaniel picked up his coffee cup. Set it down without drinking. "If you're right." "I know what it means," Clara said quietly. "I'm sorry." He stood abruptly, not in anger, but in the way of a man who needs to move when something has hit him hard. He walked to the window, stood there. Thomas appeared in the doorway in his nightshirt hair going in 4 directions, and looked between the 2 adults with the sharp perception of a child who has spent years reading the air in a room. "Is something wrong?" Thomas asked. "Go get dressed," Nathaniel said. "Papa." "Thomas." The word was quiet, final. The boy looked at Clara. She gave him the smallest nod. "It's all right. Go," and he went. Nathaniel turned back from the window. "I need to verify this before I say anything to anyone," he said. "Of course. Can you walk me through it, every entry?" "Yes." They spent the next hour at the kitchen table with every ledger open between them. Clara pointing and explaining, Nathaniel following each line with his finger and saying nothing. Ada moved around the kitchen at the far end, making enough noise to be present and enough distance to be absent. And Clara suspected the older woman understood more about what was happening than she revealed. When they finished, Nathaniel sat back in his chair. 14 months, he said, give or take. While I was... He stopped. His jaw worked once. I was focused on the cattle contracts this past year. I trusted the household accounts to... You trusted someone you had no reason not to trust, Clara said. He looked at her sharply, almost as if he expected softness to be an accusation. But it wasn't. She meant it plainly. You had no reason not to trust him, she said again. That's not a failure of judgment. That's what trust is. Something moved across his face. Not softness. He was too careful for softness yet, but something adjacent. The expression of a man encountering a response he had not prepared himself for. I need to speak to him today, Nathaniel said. I'll stay out of it, Clara said immediately. No. He said it without hesitation. I want you there. She blinked. That surprised her. You found it, he said simply. You should be there when it's addressed. Dale Rourke was a compact man in his mid-40s with sun-creased eyes and the particular confidence of someone who has been trusted for a long time and has quietly begun to mistake that trust for permanence. He came into the main room when Nathaniel sent for him, and his eyes went straight to Clara with the assessing look of a man who sees a problem and is deciding how much it is. Nathaniel laid the ledgers on the table. He didn't accuse, he didn't shout. He simply opened the pages Clara had marked and asked Dale Rourke to explain them. Rourke explained the first discrepancy, smoothly bookkeeping error easy enough he'd fix it. The second one he explained more slowly. The third one, the 14 months of systematic small withdrawals, he tried to explain as a supply pricing change that hadn't been properly recorded. Nathaniel let him finish. Then he said very quietly, Clara. She stepped forward and walked through the numbers. Not accusingly, not theatrically. She simply laid out what the entries showed in sequence, with the calm precision of someone who has spent 11 years making order out of other people's disorder. Rourke went still. This woman has been here 2 weeks, he said. His voice had changed, the smoothness gone something harder underneath. You're taking her word over mine, a mail-order bride who showed up with 1 bag and... The numbers don't come from her, Nathaniel said. They come from your ledger, with your signature. Silence. I want what you took returned, Nathaniel said. I want a full accounting by end of week, and I want your resignation on this table before supper tonight. Rourke stared at him. Then he looked at Clara, and the look was the kind she recognized from her sisters, from her mother, from every person who had ever decided she was not worth consideration, and then found out they'd miscalculated. It was not a pleasant look. You brought a stranger into this house, Rourke said. His voice was low, deliberate. You don't know the first thing about who she is, or where she came from, or what she... I know what she found, Nathaniel said. That ended the conversation. Rourke left. The door closed behind him, with enough force to rattle the frame, but not enough to be called a slam. The exit of a man trying to preserve some dignity while losing the argument. The room was very quiet. Clara became aware that her hands had been clenched in her skirt, and she made herself relax them. He's going to be angry, she said. Yes. He's been here 7 years. He knows people in town. Yes. He'll say things about you, about your judgment, about... She paused. About me. Nathaniel looked at her. Probably. Does that concern you? He picked up the ledger and closed it with the finality of a man closing a chapter. What concerns me is that 14 months of my money walked out of this ranch under my own roof. He set it down. What Rourke says around town concerns me considerably less. Clara nodded. She believed him. But she also understood in a way she suspected he didn't, because he was a man, and men didn't fully understand this particular kind of damage, that what Rourke said around town was going to land on her more than it landed on Nathaniel. She was new here. She was the mail-order bride nobody had asked for. And Dale Rourke was a man with 7 years of friendships and one very specific grievance. She took a quiet breath. And she thought, let him talk. I've been survived before. She was right about Rourke. Within a week, the story moving through the neighboring ranches and the town of Laramie was that Nathaniel Carter had dismissed a loyal man of 7 years on the word of a woman he barely knew, a woman who'd been sent to him by a Missouri family as practically a charity case, a woman whose own people hadn't thought her worth keeping. Clara heard pieces of it from Ada, who delivered information the way she delivered everything, without emotional decoration, as fact, straight across the kitchen table. They're saying Rourke was treated unfairly, Ada said one morning, without looking up from the bread she was kneading. I know, Clara said. They're saying you came here with an agenda. I came here with 1 bag and $8, Clara said. That's a modest agenda. Ada's mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was in the neighborhood. They're saying Mr. Carter's judgment has been... Ada paused. Compromised, since you arrived. Clara set down the knife she'd been using to slice apples. She looked at the older woman directly. Do you believe that? She asked. Ada kneaded bread for 5 full seconds before answering. I believe, she said finally, that you found something in 2 weeks that I had been looking at for 6 months and didn't see. She looked up. And I've been keeping accounts in some form my whole life. She went back to the bread. That was all she said, but Clara understood. Thomas found out about Rourke not from his father and not from Ada. He found out from the ranch hand named Gus, who told him with the thoughtless bluntness of a man who forgot children had ears. And Thomas arrived at the kitchen in the mid-afternoon with his father's tight jaw and his mother's eyes. Those deeply feeling eyes Clara was slowly learning to read, and said, Is it true you're the reason Rourke left? Clara put down what she was doing. Sit down, Thomas. He sat. She sat across from him. She told him the truth, not a version of it edited for age, but the actual shape of it in language a 7-year-old could follow, that she had found mistakes in the accounts that she had shown them to his father, that his father had addressed them, and that some people were angry about it. Were you scared? Thomas asked. To tell him. Clara considered this. A little, she said honestly. Why, if you were right? Because being right doesn't always protect you from the anger of the person who was wrong. Thomas turned this over with his characteristic serious deliberation. That's not fair, he said. No, Clara agreed. It's not. Did my father believe you? He looked at the numbers himself. So he knew you were right. He verified it himself, Clara corrected gently. Which is what a good person does. They don't just believe, they look. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Gus said you came here because your family didn't want you, he said. Not cruel a child's directness, the kind that opens wounds by accident. Clara held very still. My family thought sending me here was a joke, she said. The truth simple and without performance. Thomas stared at her. A joke? They thought you and your father would send me right back. They thought it would embarrass me. His face went through something complicated and swift confusion, indignation, and then a kind of protective fury that was startlingly similar to his father's expression when something had been done that shouldn't have been. That's horrible, he said. Yes, Clara agreed. It was. Did it work? Did it embarrass you? She looked at him. This small, serious boy in a too-large kitchen in Wyoming, and felt something warm move through her that she didn't have a name for yet. No, she said. It sent me here instead. Thomas looked at her for a long moment. Good, he said. He got up, pushed his chair in with the careful manners she had been quietly teaching him, and went back outside. Clara sat at the kitchen table alone for a few minutes. Then she got up and went back to work. It was at the Halverson dinner that Clara first met Victoria Hayes. Martha Halverson had organized the gathering 6 neighboring ranch families, the kind of social occasion that was equal parts genuine hospitality and information exchange, and Nathaniel had informed Clara the evening before with the practiced care of a man who found social obligations mildly burdensome that they would be attending. Together, Clara had asked. He'd looked at her with the slight impatience of a man who considered questions with obvious answers a minor inefficiency. You are my wife, he said. They were not quite that, yet the formal ceremony had been arranged for the following month, the practical arrangement having preceded the official one, but Clara didn't correct him. She wore her second-best dress, which was also her best dress, a blue wool she had kept for church occasions in Missouri. Ada pressed it for her without being asked, which Clara understood was a gesture of something, though Ada would have denied it if named. The Halverson house was full when they arrived. Clara walked in beside Nathaniel and felt the room shift, the way rooms shift. When a new variable enters an established equation, a slight adjustment, a reorientation, a collective reassessment. She met 6 women in the first 20 minutes. 4 of them were kind in the careful way of people who haven't yet decided what they think. One of them was genuinely warm, a rancher's wife named Helen Briggs, who shook Clara's hand with a grip that said she'd worked hard all her life and wasn't ashamed of it. The 6th was Victoria Hayes. Victoria was 29, unmarried, and possessed of the kind of beauty that was so deliberate it almost stopped being natural. Dark hair arranged with exact precision, a figure shown off by a dress that had been designed to be noticed, and eyes that moved over Clara with the speed and accuracy of a woman who assessed competition the way a general assessed terrain. She didn't introduce herself immediately. She waited. She came to Clara after Nathaniel had been pulled across the room by Halverson for a business conversation, and when she came, she brought 2 other women with her witnesses, though they would have called themselves friends. You must be the woman Nathaniel wrote to, Victoria said. Her voice was musical and precisely calibrated. We've all been so curious. I imagine you have, Clara said pleasantly. You came all the way from Missouri. Victoria tilted her head. How brave. Though I suppose when the alternative is... She let the sentence trail, which was worse than completing it, because the blank she left was large enough to fill with anything. Well, a new start is always a blessing, isn't it? The 2 women behind her smiled the smiles of people watching something they knew the shape of. Clara looked at Victoria Hayes with the calm of a woman who had grown up at a table with Margot Whitfield and was therefore essentially inoculated against this particular strain of elegant cruelty. It is a blessing, Clara said, though I don't think of it as a new start so much as a continuation. I've been the same person all along. Victoria's smile didn't falter. Of course you have. Tell me about yourself, Clara said. How long have your family's lands been near here? Victoria blinked just slightly, the blink of a woman who expected to control the direction of a conversation and found it redirected. My father settled here in 1868, she said, with the particular pride of old territory money. Hayes land runs from the North Creek all the way to your father and Nathaniel. They've known each other long. Many years. A pause, a slight recalibration. Nathaniel and I have known each other many years. He speaks well of people who have been good neighbors, Clara said, which was neither confirmation nor invitation, but could be heard as either. Victoria looked at her. It was the second real look, the one that came after the initial assessment, when the initial assessment had returned an unexpected result. He's lucky to have found someone so, Victoria chose her word with visible care. Practical. He's practical himself, Clara said. It suits. She excused herself to find Helen Briggs, and she could feel Victoria's gaze on her back the whole way across the room, and it felt less like discomfort than like information. The ride home was quiet until Thomas fell asleep against Clara's arm, and then it was the specific quiet of two adults who have things to say and are deciding whether to say them. Nathaniel spoke first. Victoria Hayes, he said, not a question. She's very beautiful, Clara said. She is. And she was expecting something different, Clara said, when she came to speak to me. Nathaniel's eyes stayed on the road ahead. Victoria has had opinions about my life for some years. Did she expect you would write to her? A pause. She may have expected it was the natural direction of things, yes. But you didn't. No. Why not? He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Because Victoria Hayes wants a life that looks a particular way, he said finally. And I've spent enough time trying to make things look a particular way instead of simply working. Clara absorbed this. She'll make things difficult, Clara said. Not a complaint. An assessment. Possibly. She has influence here. Her family does. Yes. And Rourke will likely find his way to her circle. Nathaniel glanced at her. You think several steps ahead. I grew up with sisters who planned things in advance, Clara said. I learned to read the board early. He turned back to the road. Thomas stirred against her arm and settled again. I'm not afraid of Victoria Hayes, Nathaniel said. I didn't think you were, Clara said. I'm not afraid of her either. A beat. I just believe in knowing what's coming. The wagon moved through the dark, and the stars above Wyoming were extraordinary, indifferent, and vast, and older than every problem either of them had ever had. And Clara leaned her cheek lightly against Thomas's sleeping hair and felt the night around them, and thought, whatever is coming, I've survived worse in a smaller space. The new foreman Nathaniel hired was a man named Cal Everett, 35. Direct, with the reputation of being honest to the point of occasional discomfort, which Nathaniel said was exactly what he needed. Clara met Cal on his second day. He looked at her with neither the hostility of Rourke nor the calculation of Victoria Hayes, but with the simple, attentive politeness of a man who reserved judgment until he had enough information to form one. You're the one who found the books, he said. I found errors in the books, Clara said carefully. Same thing. He shrugged. I've been ranching my whole life, and numbers make my eyes cross. If you can do what they're saying you did, this outfit's lucky to have you. She had not been called lucky to be somewhere in as long as she could remember. She wasn't sure she entirely knew what to do with it. Thank you, she said. He tipped his hat and went back to work. The weeks had a rhythm now. Clara found her place in the ranch's daily life not by forcing her way into it, but by identifying what needed doing and doing it quietly, efficiently, without announcement. She restructured the household supply ordering and saved enough in the first month to replace 2 fence sections that had been deferred for lack of funds. She began teaching Thomas reading and composition in the evenings after supper, and discovered that he was sharp and curious and had been taught less than he deserved, because the ranch's days left little room for sitting still. She started keeping her own set of parallel records for the household accounts, not out of distrust of Cal, who was demonstrably honest, but because she had learned that the value of a second set of eyes was that it caught what one set missed. Nathaniel noticed all of it. She knew he noticed because he was a man of very few unnecessary words, and the words he chose told you what he was paying attention to. Cal said the supply orders came in 15% under last month, he said one evening. 17, Clara said. He said 15. He rounded down. It was 17.2. Nathaniel looked at her for a moment. All right, he said. That was the whole conversation, but something in it felt like more than it was. The night the crisis came, it came without warning, which is how crises usually come when you think about it later. It was a Thursday evening in mid-September, 6 weeks after Clara had arrived. Supper was done. Thomas was in bed. Ada had retired, and Clara was at the kitchen table working through a supply manifest when she heard voices outside Nathaniel's, and another she didn't know pitched low and urgent. She set down her pen. The voices moved onto the porch. She heard fragments contract. Before the deadline. Halford's people. She stayed where she was. Nathaniel came inside 20 minutes later. His face had the particular set of a man who has received bad news and is already reorganizing around it, moving the pieces on the board. He sat at the table without speaking. Clara waited. There's a man named Gerald Halford, he said. He runs a business concern out of Cheyenne, financing arrangements, short-term loans to ranches that have cash flow problems between cattle seasons. A lender, Clara said. Among other things. He set his hands flat on the table. Last spring I took a 30-day arrangement with Halford's company to cover the payroll gap while the cattle contract settled. Standard timing issue. I've done it before. And the settlement on the cattle contracts was delayed. I paid Halford back 6 days late. He paused. He's now claiming that the agreement included a penalty clause that triggers at 5 days, and that the penalty clause restructures the debt into a 60-day instrument at an interest rate that... He stopped. Clara had already done the arithmetic in her head from what she'd heard through the door. How much? She asked. He told her. She kept her face very still. It was a significant amount. Not ruinous on its own, but combined with what Rourke had taken, combined with the deferred fence repairs and the supply shortfalls from the months of bad accounting, it was the kind of number that didn't stay the same size. It grew. Do you have the original contract? Clara asked. In my files. Can I see it tonight? He looked at her. It's almost 10 o'clock. I know what time it is. He got up and went to his office. He returned with a folded document and handed it across the table. She read it twice. All of it. Every line, including the ones at the bottom in smaller print that most people didn't read because they trusted the summary. She put it down. There is a penalty clause, she said, but the clause specifies that it requires written notification delivered to you within 24 hours of the missed payment. She looked at him. Did you receive written notification? He was very still. No. Did you receive anything from Halford's company in the 5 days after the late payment? He thought. A rider came. Verbal message that the payment had been noted late. Verbal, Clara said. Yes. She tapped the contract. This clause requires written notification. Verbal doesn't satisfy it. She paused. Which means the penalty clause was never legally triggered. Nathaniel stared at her. You're certain, he said. Read the third paragraph from the bottom, she said. The one that most people skip because the language is dense and the print is small. He read it. Then he sat back. He looked at her across the kitchen table, with the papers between them, and the lamplight casting everything in amber and shadow, and his expression was something she had not seen on him before. Not gratitude exactly, though gratitude was in it. Something more complicated. Clara, he said. The way he said her name, not the functional address, not the contracted short form of a practical arrangement, but with the weight of a man who has just understood something important. She felt it land in her chest like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known was there. You need to write to Halford's company tonight. she said, keeping her voice level, formally disputing the penalty clause, citing the notification requirement. You'll want someone in Laramie who knows contract law to review it in the morning. I know a man, Nathaniel said. He was still looking at her. Jim Reardon. Go to him first thing, Clara said. He nodded. He wasn't quite looking at the papers anymore. What would you have done, he said slowly, if you hadn't been here? The question wasn't rhetorical. He genuinely wanted to know, not the practical answer, but the personal one. She held his gaze. I would have been in Missouri, she said, making biscuits before sunrise, listening to my sisters decide what I was worth. He said nothing, but something in the silence that followed was different from all the silences before it. It had weight to it. The particular weight of a man arriving at the edge of something he has been approaching for weeks without letting himself look at it directly. He stood. He collected the contract. He paused at the kitchen doorway. Go to sleep, Clara, he said. His voice was different. Not warmer exactly, but different. Good night, Nathaniel, she said. She listened to his footsteps down the hall. She sat at the kitchen table alone with the lamplight for a long time. Outside, Wyoming was dark and enormous and full of stars. And inside the Carter ranch house, something had shifted in the walls. Quiet as a season changing, invisible as water finding its level. Something that had nothing to do with contracts or accounts, or the cruelty of people who had once sent her west as a joke. Something that had everything to do with two people who had come to a table intending practicality and found themselves in the slow, unmistakable gravity of something neither of them had planned for. Clara blew out the lamp. She went upstairs. She lay in her narrow bed in the dark and pressed one hand flat over her chest, feeling her own heartbeat steady, quiet, and for the first time in 26 years of living entirely certain it was beating in the right place. Jim Reardon read the contract in 11 minutes. Clara knew because she counted. She had the particular habit of counting things when she was nervous, steps, seconds, heartbeats, as if measurement could impose order on situations that had none. Reardon was a compact man in his 50s who wore his reading glasses on the end of his nose and had the expression of someone who had seen every variety of human dishonesty and been surprised by none of it for at least a decade. He was Laramie's only contract lawyer, which meant he was also its best one. He set the contract down. He looked at Nathaniel over the glasses. She's right, he said. Nathaniel didn't look surprised. He looked like a man who had spent the night deciding whether to believe something and had decided yes and was now receiving confirmation. The notification clause is binding, Reardon said. Halford's people sent a verbal message. Verbal doesn't satisfy written requirement. The penalty clause was never triggered. He tapped the paper. Legally, you owe Halford the original amount plus standard interest, nothing more. Halford will push back, Nathaniel said. Of course he will. He's been using this contract language for 3 years, and most ranchers don't read past the first page. Reardon picked up his pen. I'll draft the formal dispute today. We file it, we send copies, and Halford's people either fold or we take it to territorial court. My estimate, they fold. They don't want a judge looking at this contract too carefully. He glanced at Clara. How long did it take you to find the clause? He asked. The second reading, she said. Most people don't do a second reading. I know, she said. Reardon made a sound that was either approval or simple acknowledgement with him. It was difficult to tell the difference, and turned back to his desk. Outside on the street afterward, Nathaniel stopped walking. Clara stopped beside him. He stood there for a moment in the morning that was turning bright and cool, looking at nothing in particular, and then he said, My father taught me to read a contract word by word. I stopped doing that somewhere around the 5th year of running the ranch. He paused. I got busy and I got comfortable and I started trusting the summary. It happens, Clara said. It shouldn't have. She looked at him. You're being hard on yourself. I'm being accurate, he said. Not defensively, simply. She understood that about him by now, the way he applied the same unsparing honesty to himself that he applied to everything else. It wasn't self-punishment. It was the refusal to be dishonest in any direction, including inward. "Then be accurate and move forward," she said. "The clause holds. Reardon files today. Halford's people will fold before the end of the month." He looked at her. "You sound very certain," he said. "I am certain," she said. "Halford built his business on ranchers who don't read carefully. The moment someone reads carefully, his leverage disappears." She met his eyes. "He has no case. He knows it. Reardon knows it. Now you know it." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I want to ask you something." "All right." "When you were in Missouri, the accounting you did for your family, did they know what they had?" The question was simple on its surface, but underneath it was something she recognized as the real question: did they see you? "No," she said. "They knew the bills got paid and the numbers came out right. They didn't think much about how." "Did you tell them?" "Once," she said, "early on. I showed my mother where I'd found an error that would have cost them $30 by the end of the season." She paused. "She said I was showing off." Nathaniel was very still. After that, Clara said, "I just fixed things quietly and didn't mention them." He looked at her with an expression that had nothing smooth or managed about it. The expression of a man who has just understood something that angers him on someone else's behalf, which is a particular and recognizable emotion. "Come on," he said. His voice was different, lower, almost rough at the edges. "I'll take you to breakfast before we ride back." She had not expected that. She had expected back to the wagon, back to the ranch, back to work. He was already walking toward the small restaurant off the main street. She followed him. She told herself it was just breakfast. She was not entirely convincing. Halford's formal response arrived 12 days later. It was as Reardon had predicted, a retreat dressed in the language of generosity. A letter suggesting that due to the exceptional circumstances and long-standing respect for Carter, Ranch Halford's company was prepared to consider a revised repayment schedule at the original agreed terms. Nathaniel read it at the supper table. He set it down. He looked across at Clara. "He folded," he said. "He folded," she confirmed. Thomas, who understood the broad shape of the situation, even if not the details, pumped his fist under the table with the restrained celebration of a boy who has been taught not to gloat, but has strong feelings about winning. "What happens now?" Thomas asked. "We pay what we actually owe," Nathaniel said. "Nothing more." "And Halford?" "Halford goes back to Cheyenne and finds someone else to try this on." Nathaniel folded the letter. "Someone who doesn't read carefully." Thomas looked at Clara. "You read carefully." "I do," she said. "I'm going to read carefully," Thomas announced with the gravity of a child making a life decision. "Everything. Always." "Good," Clara said. "Start with your composition assignment." He made a face, but he went. Ada, clearing the dishes, passed behind Clara's chair and pressed her hand briefly to Clara's shoulder there, and gone so quickly it might have been accidental, except that Ada Malone did not do accidental. Clara kept her eyes on the table, but she felt it like a small light turning on. The formal wedding was on the first Saturday of October. It was not a large occasion. Nathaniel had said he wanted something practical, which Clara had understood to mean something honest, not a performance for the town's benefit, but a real exchange between two people who were building something real. The minister came out from Laramie. Cal Everett stood as witness. Ada wore her best dress, which was dark green and not so different from her second best dress, except in a way Clara suspected only Ada fully understood. Thomas stood very straight beside his father and was so serious about the whole proceeding that he nearly vibrated with the effort of containing whatever he was feeling. The vows were the traditional ones. When she said, "I do," Clara's voice was steady. She had practiced being steady for 26 years. But this was different. This was the steadiness of someone who has made a choice they believe in, not the steadiness of someone holding still to avoid being hurt. Nathaniel's hand was warm around hers. After Thomas threw his arms around Clara's waist with a force that nearly knocked her sideways, And she held him, this small, serious boy who had shown her where the creek was, and told her simply and completely, "Good," and pressed her face briefly into his dark hair. She held it together, but only barely. October settled over Carter Ranch with the particular beauty of a season that knows it's passing. The work continued, it always continued on a working ranch, but the texture of the days changed. There was less of the careful formality of the early weeks, less of the measured distance two people maintain when they are being polite strangers. There were moments of easy quiet, the domestic rhythm of two people who have learned each other's pace. There were evenings when Nathaniel read at the table while Clara worked through the accounts, and Thomas fell asleep over his book, and neither adult spoke for an hour, but the silence was full rather than empty. And there were moments when something cracked through the practical surface of things, a look across the room, a hand briefly steadied at her elbow, on the porch steps, a word said in a certain way. And Clara felt the unmistakable current of something the two of them were carefully not naming yet. She did not push. She had learned patience early, and learned it well. But she felt it. She knew he felt it too. The letter from Missouri arrived on a Tuesday. It was from Margot. Clara recognized the handwriting before she opened it. That particular looping script her sister had learned from a penmanship book, and had been deploying ever since, as if beautiful handwriting excused its contents. She opened it at the kitchen table, while the morning was still early and the house was quiet. Margot wrote that she hoped Clara was well. She wrote that the family had heard from a cousin in Laramie that Clara had settled into the Carter Ranch. She wrote that it was wonderful truly how things had worked out. She wrote, and this was the part Clara read 3 times, that she and Eliza were planning to travel west in November to visit, as they had always wanted to see Wyoming, and that surely Clara wouldn't mind hosting her own sisters for a week or two, given the size of the Carter Ranch. Clara folded the letter. She put it in her apron pocket. She made coffee. She thought about it for 2 hours before she told Nathaniel. He was in the barn office going through the fall cattle ledgers when she came in and handed him the letter without preamble. He read it. He read it again. "Your sisters," he said. "Yes." "The ones who sent you here as a joke?" "Yes." He looked up. His jaw had the set she recognized as controlled anger, the kind that doesn't shout because it doesn't need to. "They want to stay here." "For a week or two," Clara said. "Possibly." "In my house." "In our house," she said quietly. "Which is what they're counting on me correcting them to." He looked at her sharply. "They want to see what they sent me to," Clara said. "They want to see what became of their joke." She paused. "I think Margot expected me to be miserable. Or gone. She didn't write for 3 months, Nathaniel. She wrote now because word reached them that things are different than they expected." "Different," he repeated. "They expected you to have sent me back." He looked at the letter in his hand, then at her. "What do you want to do?" he asked. She had thought about it for 2 hours, and she still had 2 answers. The one she'd been trained by a lifetime of family to give, and the one that was actually true. She chose the true one. "I don't want them here," she said. "Not yet. Not until I've decided what I want them to see." She looked at him directly. "Is that terrible?" "No," he said without hesitation. "It's honest." "It might seem ungracious." "You're not ungracious. You're careful." He folded the letter and handed it back. "Write back what you want to write. This is your home. You decide who comes into it." This is your home. She had to look away for a moment. When she looked back, she kept her voice even. "I'll write to them," she said. "I'll tell them November isn't possible. December, perhaps." "Whatever you decide," he said. She nodded. She turned to go. "Clara." She stopped. "When they do come." Nathaniel said, "I'll be here." 3 words at the end of a practical sentence. She felt them everywhere. It was the 2nd week of November when Victoria Hayes made her real move. Clara had known it was coming. She had watched Victoria at 2 more social gatherings since the Halverson dinner, and Victoria was the kind of woman who planned who assembled pieces positioned. People waited for the right moment. She reminded Clara of Margot in that way, except that Victoria was intelligent, where Margot was simply calculating, which made her more dangerous. The move came through Gerald Halford. Reardon brought the news on a Wednesday afternoon, arriving at the ranch on horseback, with his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, which Clara had come to understand meant something urgent. He came inside. He sat down. He accepted coffee from Ada with the distracted gratitude of a man already thinking about his next sentence. Halford didn't fold, he said. Nathaniel went still. He agreed to the original terms, Reardon said, but he's filed a separate action. A dispute on the original cattle contract. He's claiming that the livestock sold in the spring transaction didn't meet the quality representations in the contract and that Carter Ranch owes compensatory damages. The table was very quiet. That's a different claim, Nathaniel said carefully. Completely separate legal ground, Reardon confirmed. The notification clause dispute shuts down one door, so we opened another. He paused. The cattle contract claim has some technical standing. Not strong standing, but enough to require response. How much is he claiming? Clara asked. Reardon told her. It was more than the penalty clause had been. Who's representing him? Nathaniel asked. Reardon set down his cup. A lawyer from Cheyenne named Marcus Briggs. No relation to Helen Briggs, different family entirely. Briggs is aggressive. He's won cases on technicality before. And who brought him in? Nathaniel asked. Reardon looked at him for a moment. That's the other thing I came to tell you, he said. Halford didn't hire Briggs on his own. Halford doesn't have that kind of connection in Cheyenne. A pause. Someone introduced them. The room was very still. Victoria Hayes's father, Reardon said, has had business dealings with Briggs for 2 years. Clara put down her coffee cup. Nathaniel looked at the table. Then, he looked at Clara. She was already thinking she could feel herself moving through it, the way she moved through account ledgers, finding the through line tracing the logic. He filed the cattle claim how long after the notification dispute was resolved, she asked. 8 days, Reardon said. And the spring cattle transaction, Nathaniel, who inspected the cattle before the sale. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Rourke. Of course it was Rourke. Rourke signed the quality representation documents, Clara pressed. As foreman, yes. And Rourke is now, she looked at Reardon. Working at the Hayes property, Reardon said quietly. Started 3 weeks ago. The full shape of it came clear. Rourke dismissed, and angry had gone to Victoria Hayes, who had her own reasons to want Carter Ranch destabilized. Victoria had introduced Rourke to Halford. Rourke had provided Halford with the ammunition the cattle transaction documents signed in Rourke's hand, with whatever representations Rourke chose to characterize them as having made. He didn't just steal from you, Clara said. He's trying to take the whole thing. Nathaniel's voice was very controlled. He signed those quality documents himself. He was there at the inspection. Which means his testimony about what was represented could go either way, Clara said. Depending on who he's working for now. She looked at Reardon. Are there independent witnesses to the cattle inspection? Cal Everett wasn't here yet, Nathaniel said. Other hands. Gus was there, Nathaniel said slowly. And the buyer brought his own man. The buyer's man is independent, Clara said. And Gus, has he been approached by anyone? Nathaniel looked at her. Then he stood abruptly and went to the door. Gus. The shout carried across the yard. Yamasaid. Gus Pemberton was a rangy, taciturn man in his 40s, who had the deeply weathered look of someone who had spent 2 decades choosing the outdoors over comfort and had no regrets about it. He came into the kitchen with his hat in his hands and the particular careful wariness of a man summoned by his employer without explanation. Nathaniel explained the situation in flat, direct sentences. Gus listened. Then Gus said, Rourke asked me about a month back, before he left. Nathaniel went very still. "Asked you what?" Clara said. Gus looked at her, that assessing look again, weighing what she was, and apparently decided she had earned straight answers. "Asked me what I remembered about the spring inspection, what the cattle looked like, what was said." He turned his hat in his hands. "I told him I remembered the cattle were fine. Good weight, good condition. Buyer was satisfied. I told him I didn't remember any dispute or concern." He paused. "He got a look then, like I'd given him the wrong answer." "Did he ask you to say anything different?" Nathaniel asked. Gus met his employer's eyes. "He said maybe my memory wasn't as clear as I thought," Gus said. "Said sometimes you don't remember things right, and maybe if I thought about it more carefully." "He tried to reframe your memory," Clara said. Gus nodded once slowly. "I told him what I remembered was what I remembered, and I'd say it the same way to anyone who asked." He looked at Nathaniel. "I didn't know he was going to make it into something. I should have told you right then." "You're telling me now," Nathaniel said. "That's what matters." Reardon was already writing. The territorial court date was set for mid-December. The intervening weeks were some of the hardest Clara had lived at Carter Ranch, not because the work increased, though it did, but because of the particular grinding tension of waiting for something large while ordinary life continued around it. She kept the household running. She kept the accounts. She continued Thomas's lessons in the evenings, though some evenings she had to reach harder for the patience she needed because the worry was sitting heavy on her chest. She wrote her reply to Margot, postponing the November visit without explanation. She drafted and redrafted Nathaniel's formal response to the cattle claim, working with Reardon through 2 full afternoons on language and documentation, and she tracked down the buyer's man. That had been her own project undertaken quietly, without telling Nathaniel until she was certain. The buyer, a rancher from Colorado named Foster, had sent his man, a careful fellow named Eli Drake, to the spring inspection. Drake was now working for a different outfit near Denver, but Reardon had a contact, and the contact had a letter, and the letter had an address. Clara wrote to Eli Drake herself. She wrote plainly. She explained the situation without dramatics. She asked if he would be willing to provide a written statement about the condition of the cattle he had inspected in April. She sent the letter on a Tuesday. She told Nathaniel on Wednesday. He looked at her across the kitchen table. "You did this on your own," he said. "I did," she said. "I wasn't certain it would work. I didn't want to raise your hopes before I knew." "You should have told me." "Yes," she said. "I should have. I'm telling you now." He looked at her for a long moment. That full, quiet attention that she had learned was his version of something other people expressed loudly. "Don't do that again," he said. "Carry the weight myself until I'm certain." "Yes." "I've been doing it my whole life," she said. "It wasn't a defense, just the truth." "I know," he said. "We're doing something different now." The word we settled between them with more weight than its size suggested. She nodded. "I know," she said. "I'm adjusting." Drake's reply arrived in 3 weeks. He remembered the inspection clearly. He remembered the cattle were in good condition. He had no dispute to report, and no recollection of any quality concern being raised. He was willing to provide a written statement to that effect, and, if necessary, to appear before the territorial court. Reardon read the letter and said, "That's the case." He meant that was what won it. Nathaniel was in the room when Reardon said it. He looked at the letter, then at Clara. He didn't say anything, but he reached across the table and put his hand over hers, just for a moment. Brief, deliberate, and so out of the ordinary for him that it hit her harder than any speech could have. She turned her hand under his just slightly, the smallest return of pressure, and then the moment passed, and they both looked back at Reardon, who had the excellent social instincts to keep his eyes on his papers. Victoria Hayes came to the ranch the day before the court date. Clara was alone in the house when she arrived. Nathaniel was with Cal, checking the winter fencing. Thomas was in the barn. Ada was at the market in town. Victoria rode up on a horse that cost more than most men's annual wages, wearing a riding habit the color of midnight, and she dismounted with the practiced ease of a woman who had been riding since before she could read. She knocked. Clara opened the door. They looked at each other. "I'd like to speak with Nathaniel," Victoria said. "He's not here," Clara said. She stepped back from the door. "You're welcome to come in and wait." Victoria looked at her with an expression Clara recognized: the recalibration, the reassessment, the slight frustration of a woman who had expected a different reaction and was too composed to show it. She came inside. Clara poured 2 cups of coffee without asking. Victoria sat at the kitchen table and wrapped her hands around her cup and said, "I want you to understand something." "All right," Clara said. "What's happening with the court case? I want you to know I didn't initiate it." Clara looked at her steadily. "You introduced Halford to Marcus Briggs." Victoria's composure held, but something shifted underneath it. "My father introduced them, through existing business connections. It's not—" "It's the same thing," Clara said, not unkindly. Silence. "My father has business interests that align with certain outcomes," Victoria said carefully. "Your father would benefit if Carter Ranch ran into serious financial difficulty," Clara said, "because he'd be in a position to acquire land at a disadvantaged price." Victoria's hands tightened around the cup. "I'm not my father," she said. Clara looked at her for a long moment. She believed her, actually. Or believed something more complex, that Victoria had let something happen she could have stopped for reasons of her own. And that was a different thing from being the architect of it. "Then say so," Clara said. "In court tomorrow. If Briggs calls witnesses from Hayes Ranch from Rourke, your father's connection to Halford will come out. It will look worse than it is." "Or better than it is," Victoria said quietly. "Only if you distance yourself from it now," Clara said, clearly and on the record. Victoria was quiet for a long time. She looked at Clara across the kitchen table, truly looked the kind of look that doesn't have performance in it. And she saw something that Clara understood in the way only women who have spent their lives being underestimated truly understand. She saw Clara looking back, not as an opponent, not as a rival, as someone who was simply steadily, entirely herself. "You're not at all what I expected," Victoria said. Her voice had lost its careful music. It was just a voice. "I know," Clara said. "I thought you'd be—" She stopped, started again. "Rourke said you were nobody, a charity case, a joke." "I was the joke," Clara said. "I stopped being funny when I showed up." Something moved across Victoria's face. Not quite a smile, but close. "What will you do?" Victoria asked, "if you win tomorrow?" "The same thing I do every day," Clara said. "Run a household, keep the accounts, teach a boy to read carefully, go to sleep, wake up, do it again." Victoria looked at her cup. "That's all?" "That's everything," Clara said. Victoria stood. She pulled on her riding gloves. "My father's connection to Halford," she said. "I'll speak to our lawyer today, before tomorrow." "Good," Clara said. Victoria walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame. "He's lucky," she said. "Nathaniel. He worked hard for everything he has," Clara said. "That's not what I meant," Victoria said. She rode away without looking back. Clara stood at the door and watched her go. Then she closed the door and leaned her back against it for a moment, alone in the house in the quiet that had the quality of something just before a change in weather, that stillness when everything that's been building is about to arrive. Tomorrow was the court date. She had done everything she could do. She pushed off the door and went back to the kitchen table. She had accounts to finish. The territorial courtroom in Laramie held maybe 60 people when it was full. It was full. Clara had not expected that. She had expected the practical attendance of people with direct involvement, Reardon Briggs, the principals, perhaps a witness or two. She had not expected the ranching community of the surrounding territory to show up the way they showed up for a hanging or a horse race. Which is to say, with the barely concealed energy of people who understood that what happened in that room was going to affect more than the two parties named in the filing. She walked in beside Nathaniel and felt the room turn. Not with hostility. With something more complicated, the collective assessment of a community that had been watching Carter Ranch through the autumn with the particular attention people pay to something they haven't yet decided how to feel about. She kept her chin level. She had learned that in her mother's parlor before she could read. They sat at the table with Reardon, who had spread his papers with the organized calm of a man who believed in the weight of documentation over the weight of performance. On the other side of the room, Marcus Briggs arranged himself with the deliberate confidence of a Cheyenne lawyer who had won cases in smaller rooms than this and knew it. Rourke was in the gallery. Clara saw him when she sat down. He was in the third row, and he was looking at her with the expression of a man who has built a structure and is waiting to watch it fall on someone. She looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked away and opened the ledger she had brought. Nathaniel leaned slightly toward her. "You don't have to look at the numbers right now," he said quietly. "I know," she said, "but having them in front of me steadies me." He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once, as if that made complete sense, which for him, it probably did. Briggs opened with confidence. He was good. Clara gave him that immediately, and without resentment, because underestimating an opponent was a luxury she had never been able to afford. He laid out the cattle claim in clean logical sequence, the spring transaction, the quality representations in the contract, the alleged shortfall between what was promised and what was delivered. His language was precise, and his manner was the particular brand of aggressive that worked in courtrooms because it looked like certainty. The judge, a heavy-set man named Caldwell, who had the expression of someone who had seen every variety of human conflict and been bored by most of them for at least 15 years, listened without expression. Reardon let Briggs finish. Then he stood up, and he began to take the structure apart. The first piece he removed was the quality representation itself. The contract language, he argued, was standard industry phrasing, not a specific guarantee of individual animal condition, but a general attestation of herd quality consistent with market grade. He produced 3 similar contracts from the same period, showing identical language used identically across the territory. Briggs objected. Caldwell overruled. The second piece was the inspection record. Reardon produced Gus's written statement, direct, plain, undecorated, about the condition of the cattle at inspection time and the absence of any buyer dispute at point of sale. Briggs called the statement self-serving. Caldwell told him to make his objection in proper form or not at all. The third piece, and Clara watched the room shift when Reardon introduced it, was Eli Drake's written statement from Colorado. Briggs hadn't known about Drake. She could tell by the way his body changed when Reardon read the document into the record, a slight forward lean, a rapid recalculation behind the eyes, the particular stillness of a man whose structure has just lost a load-bearing wall. He recovered quickly. He was good enough for that. But he had been surprised. And in a courtroom, surprise costs you something you don't always get back. Shout! Rourke took the stand an hour into the proceedings. Briggs led him through his testimony with the practiced ease of a lawyer walking a witness through a story they have rehearsed together, which Clara recognized because the story had the smooth quality of something that has been told enough times to lose its rough edges. Rourke said the cattle had shown signs of condition problems at inspection. He said he had noted concerns at the time, but that Mr. Carter had directed him to proceed with the sale regardless. He said the quality representations in the contract had not, in his professional assessment, been accurate. His voice was steady. His eye contact was good. He was believable. Clara felt Nathaniel go rigid beside her. She put her hand flat on the ledger and pressed down. Not toward him. She didn't reach for him, because this was not the moment for comfort. This was the moment for stillness. But she pressed down on the ledger, the way you press on something solid when the ground moves underneath you. Reardon stood for cross-examination. He asked Rourke 3 questions. The first, whether Rourke had signed the quality representation documents himself in his capacity as foreman. Rourke said yes, he had signed as directed. The second, whether at the time of signing Rourke had noted any formal objection in writing to the representations he was asked to make. Rourke paused. "No," he said. "Yes or no, Mr. Rourke," Reardon said. "No," Rourke said. The third question Reardon asked quietly, almost gently, which was more devastating than if he had asked it loudly, whether Rourke was currently employed by the Hayes Ranch, and whether that employment had begun within 3 weeks of his dismissal from Carter Ranch. Rourke's jaw tightened. "Yes," he said. "And did anyone associated with Hayes Ranch introduce you to Gerald Halford or to Mr. Halford's legal counsel?" Briggs was on his feet. "Objection. Relevance. Goes to witness credibility and potential coordination," Reardon said without inflection. Caldwell looked at Rourke. "Answer the question," he said. The courtroom was very quiet. Rourke said, "I was introduced, yes." The room exhaled. Briggs called his next witness. Clara had expected Halford himself, or perhaps someone from Halford's company. She had not expected the man who walked through the door. He was tall, neatly dressed, with the particular composure of someone who has been told they are impressive often enough to believe it. He introduced himself as Edward Hayes, Victoria's father, and he took the stand with the ease of a man who has operated in rooms like this before and found them agreeable. Clara went very still. She had thought Victoria had spoken to her lawyer. She had thought Hayes would distance himself. She had miscalculated something. Briggs led Hayes through a brief but pointed testimony that he had done business with Gerald Halford for 3 years, that Halford was a reputable operator whose contracts were sound, and that the quality dispute in question had been brought to his attention by a former Carter Ranch employee whose concerns had seemed credible. He said credible with the weight of a man lending his reputation to someone else's claim. The room had shifted again. Hayes' land ran to the horizon in 3 directions from Laramie. His name meant something here. Clara could feel it. Nathaniel's hand had closed around the edge of the table. Reardon stood for cross. He asked Hayes 2 questions. The first, whether Hayes' land bordered Carter Ranch on the northern property line. Hayes said it did on a portion. The second, whether Hayes had in the 18 months prior made any inquiry or offer regarding the purchase of Carter Ranch land, specifically the northern grazing section. Silence, long enough that it became its own answer. "Mr. Hayes," Caldwell said. "I may have expressed interest," Hayes said carefully. "In the normal course of—" "At what price?" Reardon said. Hayes named a figure. Clara had the Carter Ranch land assessment in her ledger. She had pulled it the night before quietly, without knowing exactly why, the same instinct that had made her check the 3rd paragraph of the Halford contract, the same instinct that had made her write to Eli Drake. The figure Hayes named was 40% below assessed value. Reardon turned to face the room, not for theater, but with the specific purpose of letting 60 people do the arithmetic themselves. He didn't need to say anything else. He sat down. Judge Caldwell called a recess. Clara sat in the hallway with Nathaniel and Reardon, and the 3 of them were quiet, in the way of people who have said everything that can be said, and are now simply waiting for events to confirm or deny it. Thomas was not there. They had left him with Helen Briggs, who had arrived at the ranch that morning uninvited and announced she was spending the day with the boy, which was the kind of thing Helen Briggs did, and which Clara had accepted with more gratitude than she showed. Nathaniel was very still beside her. She knew that stillness. She had been learning his stillnesses for months now, the way you learn the different silences of a house you've come to know well. Which ones are peaceful, which ones are waiting, which ones mean something has been decided. This was the 3rd kind. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "I'm thinking about Rourke," he said. 7 years. "Yes." "I chose him," he said. "I trusted him. And he violated that trust," Clara said. "That's on him, not on you." "I should have—" "Nathaniel." She said it plainly the way she said most things. You are a good man who trusted a person he had reason to trust. What Rourke did with that trust is Rourke's character, not yours." He turned and looked at her. "You always do that," he said. "Do what?" "Turn it back to the truth, when I'm moving away from it." She held his gaze. "Someone has to." Something in his face opened just slightly, the way a door opens when the latch releases after being stuck a long time. "7 years ago," he said. "After Margaret died, I told myself I didn't need anyone." He stopped, started again. "I meant it when I said it. I had Thomas. I had the ranch. I had work." He looked at his hands. "I had enough." "I know," she said. "I was wrong," he said. She had been very steady all morning. Through the courtroom, and the testimony, and Rourke's face, and Hayes's maneuvering through all of it, she had been steady. This was the moment she almost wasn't. She looked at the hallway wall and breathed carefully. "When you wrote that advertisement," she said, "what were you actually hoping for?" He thought about it honestly. She could see him doing it, the careful internal inventory of a man who doesn't answer questions he hasn't fully considered. "I was hoping for someone who would make the house feel less like it was just holding its breath until I died," he said. Her breath caught. "Did it work?" she asked. "Clara," he said, very quietly. She looked at him. "The house started breathing again the second week you were here," he said. "When you came into the barn with that ledger." She laughed, sudden, small, a little undone. "That's a terrible romantic moment." "I'm not a romantic man," he said. But the corner of his mouth moved. "You knew that." "I did," she said. "I came anyway." His hand moved to hers on the bench between them. Not dramatically, just there, covering hers. "I know you did," he said. Reardon came back from speaking with the court clerk. He sat down. He said, "Victoria Hayes withdrew her father's testimony." Both of them looked at him. "She contacted their lawyer this morning," Reardon said. "Before the proceedings. Hayes didn't know until he left the stand and found his daughter waiting for him in the hall." Reardon's expression was carefully neutral, but there was something working underneath it. Apparently the conversation was notable. "What does it mean for the case?" Nathaniel asked. "It means Hayes's testimony goes to weight, not substance. Caldwell will consider the credibility implications." Reardon folded his hands. "Combined with the Drake statement and Rourke's demonstrated conflict of interest, I think we're in good shape." He looked at Clara. "The letter you sent Drake," he said. "That was the pivot." She shook her head. "The cattle were in good condition. That was the fact. Drake just confirmed what was already true." "You found the fact," Reardon said. "I looked for it," she said. "That's all." He looked at her with the expression she had seen on his face the first morning in his office, that particular recalibration, and said nothing more. Judge Caldwell ruled at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He was methodical. He went through the evidence in the order it had been presented, which meant the room had to sit through 20 minutes of legal language before arriving at the conclusion, and Clara spent those 20 minutes with her eyes on the ledger in her lap and her hand very still under Nathaniel's. When Caldwell said the words, the claim was dismissed insufficient evidence to support the quality misrepresentation allegation. The court found the plaintiff's primary witness had demonstrated material conflict of interest. The room responded, not cheering. This wasn't a theatrical crowd. But there was a release, a collective exhale, a shifting of bodies, a murmur that ran through the gallery like wind through grass. Nathaniel didn't move for a moment. Then he turned to Reardon. "Is it clean?" "It's clean," Reardon said. "Dismissed with prejudice. He can't refile the same claim." Nathaniel nodded. He looked at Clara. She looked back at him. There were 60 people in that room, and Rourke in the gallery with his jaw set, and Halford's lawyer packing his papers with the efficient speed of a man who wants to be elsewhere, and Reardon already organizing his files, and none of the room was what she was aware of. She was aware of his hand on hers, and his eyes on her face, and the particular feeling of something enormous that has been suspended finally coming to rest. "Let's go home," he said. They collected Thomas from Helen Briggs's house on the way out of town. Thomas knew something significant had happened the moment he saw their faces, and he stood in Helen's doorway with his jacket half buttoned and his hat in his hand and said, "Did we win? The court ruled in our favor?" Nathaniel said. Thomas looked at Clara. "Did you win?" he asked again. Specifically her. Specifically. She understood what he meant. He wasn't asking about the legal ruling. He was asking whether the people who had doubted her, the Rourkes, the Briggses, the whole apparatus of dismissal that had been directed at his family and at her, whether those people had been answered. "I think so," she said. "Yes." He crossed the porch in 2 steps and hugged her with the force of a child expressing something he doesn't have adult words for yet. And she held him with both arms and felt his ribs expanding and contracting with breath. And let herself finally, just for a moment, feel the full weight of the last 6 months, the train west, and the platform at Laramie, and the barn with the ledger and the pen she'd been looking for, and Rourke's face, and Victoria's careful beauty, and Drake's letter arriving from Colorado, and the courtroom this morning, and Nathaniel's hand on the bench. She let it all move through her at once. Then she straightened, buttoned Thomas's remaining button. "Get in the wagon," she said. "Ada is making the good cornbread tonight." He went. Helen Briggs stood on her porch and looked at Clara with the warm, knowing expression of a woman who has watched enough of life to recognize when something important has just happened. "You did good," Helen said. "We did," Clara said. Helen shook her head slightly. "Take the compliment," she said. "You'll find I don't give them out on credit." Clara smiled. "Thank you, Helen." The ride home was nothing like the rides she had taken in those first weeks. The careful silences, the polite distance of 2 people observing the terms of an arrangement. Thomas talked continuously from the back of the wagon, processing the day through the specific lens of a boy who had been left out of the action and was now reconstructing it from fragments. He had questions about Rourke and about Reardon, and about whether Halford would try again, and about what dismissed with prejudice meant, and whether it meant Halford was prejudiced specifically. Nathaniel answered in patient, direct sentences, and Clara filled in the gaps, and the 3 of them talked the whole 40 minutes home in a way that felt less like a father and a woman he'd written for, and a child caught between them, and more like what they were without planning it, without ceremony becoming. A family. The word arrived in Clara's chest quietly without announcement. She held it there. After supper, after Thomas was in bed, after Ada had retired with the knowing discretion she deployed in the evenings, now Nathaniel and Clara sat at the kitchen table with the remains of the good cornbread between them and the lamp burning low. He poured coffee. He sat. He looked at her across the table with an expression that had none of the managed quality she had come to recognize as his default, none of the careful rationing of what he showed. It was the expression of a man who has spent the day in a room where things could have gone very badly and hasn't quite put his armor back on. "I need to tell you something," he said. "All right." He wrapped his hands around the cup. "When I wrote that advertisement, when I was trying to say what I was looking for, I wrote the words honesty and strength. I meant them practically. I meant someone who wouldn't pretend the ranch was something it wasn't, and someone who wouldn't fall apart when things were hard." "I know," she said. "I didn't mean—" He stopped. "I didn't know what I meant past that. I thought I was being practical." "You were," Clara said. "I thought partnership was the most I was capable of," he said. "After Margaret. After the years I spent just keeping the wheels turning and not feeling much else." He looked up from the cup. "I was wrong." The kitchen was very quiet. "Nathaniel," she began. "I'm not finished," he said. Not sharp, just steady. He had something he needed to say, in the order he needed to say it, and she recognized that, because it was how she thought too. "I watched you this fall," he said. "I watched you walk into a house that wasn't yours, and learn it from the ground up without complaint. I watched you find what Rourke had done, and bring it to me instead of carrying it yourself. I watched you with Thomas, the way he looks at you now, the way he was before, and the way he is now." He paused. I watched you in that courtroom today with that ledger in your lap and your hand on the table steady as bedrock. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat. I don't think you came here because your family sent you as a joke, he said. I think you came here because you were the only one in that house with the courage to go. She had been steady all day. She was not going to be steady for this. She looked at the table, pressed her lips together, breathed once. They sent me to be humiliated, she said. Her voice was even, barely. I know. They thought I would fail. I know. They thought you would take one look at me and... Clara? She looked up. I took one look at you on that platform, he said. And I thought she came alone. She came all this way with one bag, and she stood on that platform, and she didn't look away. He held her eyes. I didn't know yet what I was looking at, but I knew it was something I hadn't seen before. She breathed. I love you, he said, plain and direct and exactly like him. I'm not certain I know how to do it correctly after this many years of not doing it, but I know what I feel, and I know I'm done pretending it's just a practical arrangement. She looked at this man across a kitchen table in Wyoming, this careful, honest, difficult, decent man who had spent 4 years locked inside his own grief and had slowly, reluctantly, stubbornly let her in, and felt 26 years of being someone's smallest story dissolve like morning frost in the sun. I love you too, she said. I think I have for a while. How long? He asked, not with insecurity, with genuine curiosity, the curiosity of a man who wants to know exactly where things began. The barn, she said. The ledger. He laughed, not the polite sound, the real one. She had heard it perhaps 4 times in 6 months, and each time it hit her like something unexpected and entirely right. That's a terrible romantic moment, he said, using her own words back at her. I'm not a romantic woman, she said. You knew that. I did, he said. I married you anyway. She smiled. He reached across the table past the cornbread and the coffee cups, and 6 months of ledgers and letters and one very important contract clause, and took her hand. And held it. The letter from Margot arrived the following week. Another one. More insistent this time, the language carrying the particular pressure of a woman who had not gotten the response she expected and was escalating. Margot wrote that she and Eliza and their mother had made arrangements to travel west in January. She wrote that it had been so long since they had seen Clara that family was family, that surely now that things were settled and comfortable, Clara would want to reconnect with the people who had always loved her best. Loved her best. Clara sat with that phrase for a long time. Then she wrote back. She wrote that January was not a good time as the ranch was entering a demanding season. She wrote that she hoped the family was well. She wrote with great care and complete calm that Carter Ranch had experienced some significant events in the preceding months, and that she was sure word had reached Missouri of the outcome. And she wrote, this was the sentence she drafted 4 times before she was satisfied with it, that she was glad now to have made the journey west. That she had found something in Wyoming she had not known she was looking for, that she was happy. She signed it, with love, Clara Carter. She sealed it. She left it on the hall table for the Morning Post. Then she went back to the kitchen, where Nathaniel was reviewing the winter cattle ledger, and Thomas was asleep in the chair by the fire with a book fallen open on his chest. And Ada was somewhere in the back of the house, doing the efficient and endless work she always did. Clara sat down across from Nathaniel with her own ledger. He glanced up. Margot again, he said. January, she said. She's persistent. He looked back at his ledger. She looked at hers. After a moment he said without looking up, January is a difficult season. The cattle need extra management. The accounts are complex. That's what I told her, Clara said. Good. He turned a page. February is also difficult. She looked at him. He was studying the ledger with great concentration. March, he said, can be unpredictable. Nathaniel, she said. He looked up. They will come eventually, she said. We can't put them off forever. I know, he said. but we can put them off until you're ready." She held his gaze. Until she was ready. Not until he decided. Not until the ranch's schedule permitted. Not until it was convenient for everyone else. Until she was ready. She thought about the kitchen in Missouri, the biscuits before sunrise, the footsteps of her sisters coming downstairs at 9 o'clock. She thought about Margot's voice. "Send Clara." She thought about the platform in Laramie and the blue handkerchief and the long ride to a ranch she didn't know. She thought about who she had been when she left, and who she was now sitting at this table in this house with this man and this boy and this life that nobody had sent her to and that nobody had given her. That she had walked toward herself. "Spring," she said. "I'll be ready in spring." He nodded. He went back to the ledger. She went back to hers. Outside Wyoming moved through its cold and its dark and its enormous indifferent stars. And inside the Carter ranch house, the lamp burned steady, and a woman who had once been sent west as someone's joke sat across from a man who had found her heart instead of her face, and the two of them worked side by side in comfortable silence, which was in ways that people who only read the surface of things would never understand one of the most profound and complete forms of love there is. Spring came to Wyoming the way it always did, not gently, not all at once, but in arguments with winter. That winter kept losing degree by degree, day by day. Until one morning you woke up and the air had a different quality, and the ground under your boots had given it again, and you understood without being told that something had turned. Clara felt it on a Tuesday morning in late March, standing at the kitchen window with her coffee, and she thought they're coming this week. Margot had written in February with a date. Clara had written back to confirm it. The exchange had been polite in the way of two people who have put down their weapons temporarily and are pretending the weapons were never there. Nathaniel knew the date. He had said nothing about it since January, when Clara had told him spring. He filed information away and retrieved it when needed, which was, she had come to understand one of the things she most valued about him. He didn't perform readiness. He simply was or wasn't, and you knew the difference. Thomas knew the date because Thomas knew everything that happened in that house. He had opinions about it, which he had been diplomatically suppressing for 2 weeks, and Clara could feel the suppression the way you feel weather building. It broke at breakfast on Monday. "What do I call them?" Thomas asked. He was eating cornmeal with the focused energy of a boy who had been thinking about something and had decided to stop thinking and start asking. "You call them Miss Margot and Miss Eliza," Clara said. "Not Aunt." She looked at him. "Not yet," she said. He considered this with his characteristic deliberation. "Do you want them to come?" Clara set down her coffee cup. Thomas watched her with his father's eyes, the ones that didn't let you get away with a surface answer. "I want to stop being afraid of them," she said. "That's different from wanting them here, but it might require the same thing." Thomas turned this over. "You're afraid of your sisters." "I was afraid of what they thought of me," she said. "For a very long time." "Are you still?" She thought about it honestly, the way she had learned to think about hard things since coming to Wyoming, not performing an answer, but actually looking. "Less," she said. "But I want to see their faces when they walk through that door. I want to know for certain that it's gone." Thomas nodded slowly. "That makes sense," he said. He picked up his spoon. "I'll be very polite to them," he announced with the gravity of a small person making a significant concession. "But I won't pretend I like them until I know if I do." "That's all I ask," Clara said. From behind the stove, Ada made a sound that was almost certainly not a laugh, because Ada did not laugh at breakfast. They arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. The wagon from town appeared on the road at just past 3 o'clock, and Clara was in the yard when it came, not because she had been waiting there, but because she had been checking the kitchen garden and hadn't gone back inside yet, which she told herself was coincidence, and which she knew was not. She stood and watched the wagon come. 3 women. Her mother small and upright in the front beside the driver. Margot and Eliza in the back, both in traveling clothes that announced they had made an effort which Clara recognized as a statement. The wagon stopped. Margot climbed down first. She was still beautiful, Clara had not expected that to have changed. Beauty like Margot's was structural, built into bone and proportion, and it didn't care about moral inventory. She looked at Clara. Clara looked at her. 6 months of Wyoming had done things to Clara that she hadn't tracked consciously, but that she could feel now reflected back in her sister's expression, a recalibration, a fractional widening of the eyes, the specific look of someone who has arrived expecting one thing and encountered another. "Clara," Margot said. "Margot," Clara said. "How was the journey? Long?" Margot said. Her voice was careful. She was already assessing the house, the yard, the distance between what she'd imagined and what she was looking at. Eliza came around the wagon with a smile that was mostly genuine and partly performance, which was Eliza's particular mixture in most situations. "You look different," she said. "I live differently," Clara said. Their mother reached her last, and Ruth Whitfield stood in front of her plainest daughter and looked at her with an expression Clara had been trying to read for 26 years and had never fully decoded. There was something in it now she hadn't seen before. Something quiet and not quite comfortable. "You're well," Ruth said. A statement, not a question. "Very well," Clara said. "Come inside. Ada has coffee and the good cornbread." She turned and led them in. She did not look back to see their faces. She didn't need to. Nathaniel came in from the ranch at 5 o'clock. Clara heard the door and felt the room change, not dramatically, but the way a room always changes when the person who owns it enters. He filled space differently than other people. He always had. He came into the sitting room where the 4 women were arranged in the particular configuration of people being polite at high cost, and he looked at the tableau for exactly 1 second before his eyes found Clara. She gave him the smallest nod. "I'm fine." He looked at her mother, at Margot, at Eliza in turn. "Ladies," he said, "welcome to Carter Ranch." His voice was exactly what it always was, measured, direct, carrying no performance. He shook Ruth's hand, nodded to the sisters, accepted coffee from Ada without taking his eyes off the room for long enough to make anyone feel unseen. Margot had gone slightly still when he walked in. Clara noticed. She had expected this, had thought about it actually in the weeks of preparation. Nathaniel Carter was not the man Margot had imagined when she'd sent Clara's name as a joke. She had imagined desperate. She had imagined grateful. She had imagined a man who would open the door, see Clara, and provide the humiliation she had ordered. She had not imagined this. Supper was the first real test. Thomas sat beside Clara and ate his food, and was true to his word, scrupulously polite. He answered questions when asked, offered information when relevant, and maintained the careful neutrality of a child who has decided to observe before concluding. Margot asked him what grade he was in. "Clara teaches me," he said. "She says I'm reading 2 years above where the school in town has boys my age." Margot looked at Clara. "You teach him," she said. "Every evening," Clara said. "He's quick." "She taught me to do accounts too," Thomas said. "I can find errors." A small silence. "Can you?" Eliza said, with the tone of someone who is not sure what to do with a child who says things like that. Thomas ate a bite of potato. "Clara found an error in our accounts that saved the ranch a lot of money. I'm learning so I can help when I'm older." Ruth Whitfield put down her fork. She looked at her daughter, not the quick social look, but a longer one, the kind that requires you to actually see what's in front of you. Clara held it. She had been holding her mother's gaze for 26 years and always looked away first. She didn't look away. Ruth picked her fork back up. But something in the table had shifted, and everyone at it felt it, and nobody mentioned it directly, because that was not how these things were done. So, it was Margot who came to her room that night. Clara had been expecting it. Margot had never been able to leave a thing alone. She needed resolution, needed the last word, needed to know where she stood. It was, Clara had long thought, one of her sister's most human qualities, buried under all the performance. She knocked. Clara said, "Come in." Margot came in and stood in the middle of the small room, her own room in Missouri, was 3 times the size, and something in her posture registered this, though she was too controlled to say so, and looked at Clara, sitting on the bed with a book. "You look different," she said again. "You said that earlier," Clara said. "I mean it more now." Margot sat in the chair by the window without being invited, which was so consistent with her character that Clara almost smiled. "He's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Margot was quiet for a moment, the rare quiet of a woman who is being honest instead of strategic. "I expected someone who had settled," she said. "Someone who wanted a housekeeper and called it a wife." "He wanted a partner," Clara said. "He just didn't know that's what he was asking for. And you're that," Margot said. The words had a texture Clara couldn't immediately name, not quite resentment, not quite admiration. Somewhere between. "I'm trying to be," Clara said. Margot looked at the room. The plain furniture, the hook with the shawl, the tin box on the washstand, that she would have no way of knowing held $8.40, and a letter Clara had written to herself in Missouri on the last night before everything changed. "We didn't think you'd go," Margot said. "I know. We thought—" She stopped. "You thought I'd understand it was a joke and stay home," Clara said, "and be humiliated privately instead of publicly." Margot flinched. A small movement, but real. "Yes," she said. "Why?" Clara asked. She wasn't angry. The anger had moved through her in the months since and been replaced by something more useful, genuine curiosity. "What did I do that made you think I deserved that?" "You didn't do anything," Margot said. "Then why?" Margot looked at the floor. "Because you were always better than you looked," she said. "And nobody saw it but you. And that made me—" She stopped again. The word she was looking for was one she didn't want to say because it required too much honesty. "Uncomfortable," Clara offered quietly. Margot looked up. "When someone near you has something genuine that you don't," Clara said, "and they're not using it against you, it's still uncomfortable. Because it shows you what you're missing." Margot stared at her. "I'm not saying this to hurt you," Clara said. "I'm just saying what I think happened." "When did you get like this?" Margot said. The words were half frustration and half something else. "I've always been like this," Clara said. "You just didn't have to listen before." Silence. Margot stood. She moved to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame, the same posture Victoria Hayes had held in this very house 3 months ago. And Clara thought the doorframe pause. The moment when people stand at the edge of something and decide whether to say the real thing. "I'm sorry," Margot said. Her voice was flat with the effort of making it. "For sending you here the way we did. For the reason we did it." Clara looked at her sister. She had waited 26 years for an apology from Margot. It sounded exactly like she would have expected, effortful, slightly stiff, real underneath. "I know," Clara said. "Thank you." Margot nodded once. Went out. Clara sat with the quiet for a moment. Then she put down her book, picked up the tin box from the washstand, and opened it. The $8.40 were still there. The letter was still there. She took the letter out. She read it one more time. "I only know what I am leaving. And leaving a place that has always made you feel like a mistake is not a loss. It is the beginning of finding out if you were ever wrong about yourself." She hadn't been wrong. She folded the letter carefully. Put it back. Closed the box. The week passed. Eliza thawed fastest. She had always been the more flexible of the two, her cruelty less structural and more borrowed from Margot, and without Margot directing things, she defaulted to her actual personality, which was vain and somewhat shallow, and underneath both capable of warmth. She developed a genuine affection for Thomas within 3 days. Thomas allowed it with the dignity of a boy who was pretending he hadn't already decided he liked her, which Clara found endearing in both of them. Ruth Whitfield was the hardest. Not because she was hostile, because she was watching. She watched Clara in the kitchen, and at the table, and with Thomas, and with Nathaniel, and she watched with the expression of a woman assembling a picture she had not previously had the pieces for. Clara could feel the assembly happening. It was uncomfortable in the way that being truly seen by someone who had previously only glanced at you is uncomfortable, the sudden exposure of having a witness where there had only ever been a judge. It came to a head on Friday morning. Nathaniel was at the far pasture. Thomas was doing his lessons in the sitting room. Eliza and Margot were somewhere in the house. Clara was in the kitchen going through the weekly supply manifest when her mother came in and sat down across from her without preamble. Clara kept working. Ruth watched her. "You run this house," Ruth said. "Yes," Clara said. "The accounts, the supply ordering, the staff." "Ada runs the household staff," Clara said. "I handle the financial records. Thomas's education." "Yes." Ruth was quiet. Clara turned a page. "I didn't know you could do all of this," Ruth said. Clara looked up. "I did it in your house for 11 years, she said. "The accounts, the supply ordering, the mending, the kitchen before anyone else was awake." She held her mother's gaze. "I just did it there without anyone noticing." Ruth absorbed this, orbed. She was not a demonstrative woman. She had never been. Her love, if it had existed, had always expressed itself sideways, in practical provisions, rather than warmth, in management, rather than presence. "I wasn't fair to you," Ruth said. 3 words at the center of 26 years. Clara set down her pen. "No," she said. "You weren't." She didn't soften it. She didn't rush to reassure. She let the truth sit between them the way it deserved to sit. Ruth's chin moved, a small adjustment. The kind of movement a person makes when they are holding something difficult inside. "I didn't know how to," she began. "I know," Clara said. "I'm not asking you to have been different than you were. I'm just telling you what was true." Ruth looked at her. "Are you happy?" she asked. The same question Helen Briggs had asked, but from a different place, not celebration, but something closer to accountability. "Yes," Clara said. "Genuinely." Ruth nodded. She looked at the table. "He's a good man." "He is." "The boy is, he's very like you," Ruth said, "in the way he thinks." Clara blinked. That surprised her. "You think so?" she said. "He watches everything," Ruth said, "before he speaks." She looked up. "You always did that. I thought it was shyness. I see now it was something else." Clara looked at her mother. Truly. Looked the way she had learned to look at things since coming to Wyoming without flinching, and saw a woman who had made the decisions she'd made inside the constraints she'd understood, and who was sitting in a kitchen in Wyoming, looking at the daughter she'd failed, and finding that she had to revise something fundamental about the story she'd been telling herself. It wasn't enough to undo anything, but it was something. "Stay through the weekend," Clara said. "There's something I want to show all of you on Saturday." Ruth looked up. "What?" "Saturday," Clara said, and went back to her manifest. Saturday was clear and cold and bright, with the particular Wyoming light that had no apology in it, direct and total, the kind of light that showed everything. Clara had arranged it with Nathaniel the week before. He had listened to her plan with his customary stillness, asked 2 questions, and said, "All right." She took her mother and her sisters out to the north pasture after breakfast. Nathaniel was already there with Cal Everett and 3 of the hands running the spring cattle inventory, the real work of the ranch, loud and physical, and nothing like the polished surface version of ranching that people who didn't know it imagined. She watched her family watch it. Watched Eliza's eyes go wide at the scale, the hundreds of cattle moving through the sorting pens, the noise, the controlled choreography of men and animals working in practiced coordination. Watched Margot take in Cal's quiet deference to Nathaniel, the way the hands moved when he spoke the particular authority of a man in his own element. Watched her mother, watching Nathaniel, watch Clara. Because he did. In the middle of managing the cattle inventory with Cal at his elbow, and 3 hands looking to him for direction, Nathaniel Carter glanced across the pen and found Clara, and the look that passed between them was nothing that could be performed. Nothing that could be arranged. Just 2 people who knew each other and were glad the other was there. Ruth Whitfield saw it. Clara saw her mother see it. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. The real twist came that afternoon. Margot found the letter, not through snooping through the specific accident of being in Clara's room, looking for a handkerchief she thought she'd left there, and reaching toward the washstand and knocking the tin box to the floor and picking it up and seeing the folded letter fall out. She brought it to Clara in the kitchen. "This fell," she said. She held out the box and the letter separately. Her expression was uncertain in a way Clara had almost never seen on her. Clara took them. She looked at the letter. Then, after a moment that she would not have been able to fully explain, she unfolded it and held it out to Margot. "Read it," she said. Margot looked at her. "Read it," Clara said again. Margot took the letter. Clara watched her sister's face while she read the same face she had watched across tables and over her shoulder and through doorways her whole life, and she watched it move through something it had not moved through before. Margot read it twice. She folded it carefully. She handed it back. She said, "You wrote this the night before you left." "Yes." "After we—" She didn't finish. "Yes," Clara said. Margot stood very still. "You weren't afraid," she said. "Were you?" "Not really." "I was afraid," Clara said. "I was afraid the whole train ride, and I was afraid on the platform, and I was afraid every day for the first 2 weeks." "But you did it anyway." "There was nothing left to lose," Clara said. "That's different from not being afraid. That's just running out of reasons to stay." Margot looked at her. "We gave you no reasons to stay," she said. "No," Clara agreed. Margot's face did something complicated. She handed the letter back turned and walked out of the kitchen. Clara heard her go upstairs. She stood at the kitchen table alone with the letter in her hand. Then Ada appeared from the back of the house, looked at the ceiling, where the footsteps had gone, looked at Clara and said, "I'll put on more coffee." "Thank you, Ada," Clara said. "Don't thank me," Ada said, already moving. "I was going to do it anyway." Duh. Nathaniel found Clara at the kitchen table after supper that evening, when the house had settled into its nighttime sounds, and the guests were upstairs, and Thomas was in bed, and the 2 of them were alone in the particular piece of the kitchen. He sat down. He looked at her. "How are you?" he asked. "Tired," she said. "The good kind." Did it help having them here? She thought about it honestly, which he always gave her room to do. "Yes," she said. "I didn't know if it would, but yes." She looked at the table. "My mother told me she wasn't fair to me." He was quiet. "She didn't say much else," Clara said. "She didn't try to explain or justify. She just said it." She looked up. "I think that might be the most honest thing she's ever said to me." "Is it enough?" he asked. Not pushing, genuinely asking, wanting to know what she needed. "It's a start," she said. "I'm not looking for it to be everything. I stopped needing everything from them a long time ago." She paused. "I think I just needed to hear the truth out loud. In this house. So I could stop carrying it around like a question." He reached across the table. She put her hand in his. "You know what's strange?" she said. "What?" "I came here because I had nothing to lose. And now I have—" She looked around the kitchen. "Everything. And it's not what I expected. It's better." "Better how?" he said. "Real," she said. "It's real. It's not a story I was told about what my life should look like. It's just what it actually is." He looked at her with that expression she had come to know better than any other. The one that wasn't performance or management, the one that was just him entirely. "It is real," he said. "Every part of it." Margot came downstairs late that night. Clara heard her in the kitchen and came down to find her sister sitting at the table with a cup of cold coffee. She hadn't drunk, staring at nothing. Clara sat across from her. "I keep thinking," Margot said, "about what would have happened if you hadn't gone." "I'd still be in Missouri," Clara said, "and I would never have—" Margot stopped. Started again. "I never looked at you and thought about what you were capable of. I only ever looked at you and thought about what you weren't." "I know," Clara said. "That's a terrible thing," Margot said, "to do to someone." "Yes," Clara agreed. She didn't soften it. She had stopped softening things for people who needed the truth more than comfort. "I'm not going to pretend it was something else," Margot said. "I know I can't fix it. She looked at her hands on the table. "I wanted you to know that I see it now. What I did. What all of us did." Clara looked at her sister for a long moment. 26 years of a particular kind of loneliness. 26 years of making biscuits before sunrise and keeping accounts nobody credited, and being the smallest story in a house full of people who should have known better. And then a train west. And a platform. And a blue handkerchief. And a boy who showed her where the creek was. And a man who looked at a ledger she'd brought to the barn and said thank you, like he meant it all the way down. "I know you see it," Clara said. "That matters." "Does it change anything?" Margot asked. "It changes some things," Clara said. "Not everything, but yes, some things." Margot nodded. She picked up the cold coffee, looked at it, set it back down. "He loves you," she said. "Not with envy, or not only with envy. With something more complicated. Nathaniel, it's not arrangement. You can see it." "I know," Clara said. "You deserve that," Margot said. The words cost her something. Clara could hear it. "You always did." Clara held her sister's gaze. "So do you," she said. "Go find it. Don't wait for someone to send you somewhere. Go yourself." Margot looked at her with an expression Clara had never seen on her face before. Open, uncertain, younger somehow than her years. Then she laughed. Small, startled, genuine. "That's very easy for you to say," she said. "I know," Clara said. "I also know that 6 months ago I had $8.40 and one bag and a train ticket. And I was terrified." She leaned forward slightly. "Go anyway." They left on Monday morning. The wagon came at 8 o'clock, and the 3 Whitfield women loaded their cases with the organized efficiency of people who have been traveling together long enough to have a system. Thomas shook Eliza's hand with great formality, and then ruined it by grinning when she hugged him. Ruth stood in front of Clara last. She looked at her for a long moment. Then she did something she had not done since Clara was very small. She reached up and touched Clara's face. Just briefly. Just the back of 2 fingers against her daughter's cheek. "Write to us," she said. "I will," Clara said. Ruth nodded, turned, climbed into the wagon. Margot was last. She stood in front of Clara, and they looked at each other, the way sisters look at each other, when they have been through something real and come out the other side changed by it. "I mean it," Margot said. "What I said the other night." "I know you do," Clara said. "I'll be better," Margot said. "I'm not asking you to believe that yet. I'll be better." "Good," Clara said. "That's the only thing worth doing." Margot hugged her quick, genuine, not the performance hug of social occasions, but the real kind, the kind that admits something. Then she climbed up. The wagon moved. Clara stood in the yard and watched it go down the road until it was small and then gone, the dust settling back into the cold, bright morning. Nathaniel came to stand beside her. He didn't say anything. She didn't need him to. They stood there together in the quiet that had the quality of something completed, not ending, but completing the way the last piece of something slots into place, and you feel the whole thing become solid under your hands. "Thomas has his composition lesson in 20 minutes, she said. "He knows," Nathaniel said. "And the supply manifest needs to go to town by Wednesday." "I'll send Gus." The north fence section Cal flagged. "Clara," he said. She stopped. He turned to face her. "The ranch will still be here in 10 minutes, he said. She looked at him. The morning light was direct and honest in the way of Wyoming light. No flattery, no softening. And it fell on his face and on hers equally, and she thought, this is what real looks like. Not beautiful in the way they taught me to measure beauty. Just real and solid and here. "I know," she said. He took her hand. "Come inside," he said. They walked back to the house together. The house that had once held its breath for 4 years, and had slowly, under the hands of a woman sent west as a joke, learned to breathe again. The story of Clara Whitfield. Clara Carter now spread through the ranching community of Wyoming Territory, the way true stories always spread quietly, first, then everywhere. People remembered the woman who had arrived with 1 bag and $8. They remembered the ledger she'd brought to the barn. They remembered the courtroom in December and Eli Drake's letter from Colorado, and the moment Judge Caldwell had read the ruling into the record. Helen Briggs told the story at every gathering she attended for 2 years, always ending it the same way, and the thing is, she never once asked anyone to see her. She just kept being exactly who she was until they couldn't not. Cal Everett, who was not a sentimental man, and said so regularly, told anyone who asked that the wisest thing Nathaniel Carter had ever done was read a letter that said, "Someone real," and understand what that meant. Ada Malone told no one anything which was consistent with her character, but the cornbread she made on the evenings Clara was particularly tired got slightly richer and the coffee slightly stronger, which was for Ada a full declaration. Thomas Carter grew up to be the kind of man who read every contract to the final paragraph and taught his own children to do the same. And when they asked him why he told them about a woman who had found a clause in a paragraph nobody else read and changed everything with it. And Nathaniel Carter, who had spent 4 years building walls around the parts of himself that grief had cracked open, who had written an advertisement looking for honesty and strength without understanding that he was writing those words because he had forgotten what it felt like to give his own heart somewhere safe to land. Nathaniel Carter became, in the years that followed, the man he had been trying to be when he thought the work was enough. He was not a romantic man. He never became one. But he was a man who learned through the steady, undemanding, entirely genuine presence of a woman nobody had thought to look at twice, that love built on real ground holds against everything. Against rivals who want what you have. Against men who steal from you slowly. Against families that measure people in the wrong units. Against the long accumulated weight of your own grief. It holds. Clara Carter stood at the kitchen window on a morning in early April, watching Thomas ride his horse across the far pasture with Cal at his side, the boy sitting the saddle with the easy confidence of someone who had grown up in a place and known it was his, and felt the particular contentment of a woman who has stopped waiting for her life to begin because she is too busy living it. Nathaniel came up behind her. He put his hands on her shoulders. She leaned back into him. "What are you thinking?" he said. "That I'm glad Margot sent that letter," she said. He made a low sound. "I am too." "I wasn't what she intended to send," Clara said. "She meant to send a joke." "She sent the best thing that ever came through that door," he said. Clara turned. She looked at him, this man who had chosen the word real in an advertisement and meant it with his whole complicated heart, and she smiled. Not the careful, managed smile of a woman who has spent her life trying not to take up too much space. The full one. The one she had been saving without knowing it for a life that deserved it. "Go check on your son," she said. "He's taking that horse through the east pasture again, and you told him to wait on the east pasture." "He doesn't listen," Nathaniel said. "He listens to everything," Clara said. "He just decides for himself after." "He gets that from you," Nathaniel said. "He gets that from his father," Clara said. Nathaniel looked at her. Then he kissed her straight forward, unhurried the way he did everything, and went out to find his son. Clara turned back to the window. The woman who had once been sent west as a joke who had arrived on a platform in Laramie with one bag and $8.40, and a letter she had written to herself about not knowing what she was going toward. Stood in the house she had built from the inside out and watched her family cross the morning pasture together. And she knew with the kind of certainty that doesn't need to be spoken or performed or proven to anyone, that she had found exactly what she had written about that last night in Missouri. Not a new start, a continuation of the woman she had always been, finally in a place large enough to hold her. The joke had become the blessing. The forgotten sister had become the woman they remembered. And the bride they sent to humiliate a lonely rancher had built something so real, so solid, and so full of love that it would stand long after the people who had laughed at her had forgotten why they ever thought she was someone worth laughing at. She had not arrived to prove anything. She had arrived to live. And that every quiet, honest, undecorated day of it was more than enough.